on? There I am. Okay. I was afraid I was on and turned myself off, or off and turned myself on. I'm all out of sorts. But I'm glad to be back with you guys this morning as we continue our series talking about 5 different attributes of God. And so what I want to do this morning to start off is review a little bit, because even though this is only our 3rd week, we've covered a lot in these first 2 weeks. So just want to remind you, an attribute is just something that reveals God's nature, something that teaches us more about who he is. And we talked about the fact that there are 2 categories of attributes. Do you remember this? Communicable and incommunicable. And we said that the communicable things are things that we can imitate. Things like kindness and love and mercy and grace. But the incommunicable attributes are attributes that only God can have. They cannot be true of anyone else. And we should not be imitators of these things. Even as we follow God and we become more like him through the process that big church word we just call sanctification. That's just the process of us being made more like God as we follow him. We cannot become these attributes. They are reserved only for God. And when we try to be these things, it really is a form of idolatry. It's a form of us trying to make ourselves like God. And so in week 1, we talked about the fact that God is limitless, that he's not bound by anything other than himself, his own character and his own nature. And Jen Wilkin has a quote that I heard this week that really just sums up, I feel like, the impetus for this whole series. And it says this, you'll see it on the screen. It says, any of our vices, which are just things that we are drawn to or feel a compulsion to, are rooted in a desire to be limitless in some way. So take, for example, that little phone that rides around in your purse or in your pocket or in your hand. As we are drawn to that, it's because it gives us, in some ways, a feeling of being limitless, right? Of being connected to almost anyone in the world, of being able to know things at the tap of a fingertip. And so we're drawn to it because we're drawn to that limitlessness. Last week we talked about God's omnibeneficence. And I know that that is a big word and it's a little tricky to say, but if you missed last week, I really would encourage you to go to our podcast or a YouTube channel and listen to last week, because omnibeneficence just means that God is always and limitlessly good. And until we understand that, and that becomes the foundation of our knowledge of God and our understanding of God, we can't properly lay these other attributes that we're going to be talking about on top of that without that foundation. So omnibeneficence, God is limitlessly good. Now I want you to remember that we can never fully grasp these concepts. Romans 11:33, I want to read it to you in the New Living Translation, says, "Oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge, and how impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways." Because here's the thing, God is incomprehensible. Because he is infinite and we are finite. And there's a quote that says that the finite is unable to contain the infinite. And that gets frustrating to us sometimes, that we can't understand. But this fact that God is incomprehensible is actually another attribute of God that we're not going to spend a whole week on, but it's the fact that God is transcendent. It speaks to his godness, if you will, the fact that he transcends, and that word just means that he rises above, that he exceeds, or that he is set outside of our ability to understand. He's bigger than our human understanding, but the good news is that he's also immanent, another of his attributes. And all that means is that he is with us and he is able to be known. Maybe not fully known and comprehended, but enough to where we can know him and have a relationship with him. And so I want you to remember that it's okay that God exceeds our understanding. I don't want you to be frustrated by that. There will always be a tension, but it is a good thing that we are not able to fully understand God. And I want you to know that that's not because of sin. It's simply because of our design. God designed us that way. He designed us not to be able to fully understand him, because that separates who he is from who we are, right? That makes him God. That makes him bigger than us. And so this gap between what we can understand of God and who God actually is, that's the gap where faith lives. So at some point, we max out our ability to understand, and we still have an infinite way to go to know who God is to his fullest. And so what fills that gap is our faith. Our faith of saying, even when I can't understand, I believe. Even when I can't comprehend what you're doing, I trust you. And so this gap is a good thing. I want you to think of maybe something you've seen or a place you've been that was just hard for you to put into words, that so wowed you that you're not even really capable of describing it. Maybe you've been to the Grand Canyon, or maybe it's even a sunset on the beach looking out at the ocean. Maybe it's just a moment, like even the birth of your child, or a moment where you were just wowed. A few years ago, our family had the opportunity to go as a family with a couple of other families to Rwanda. And we spent about 10 days there, and we spent the first few weeks going around to different places in Rwanda, but our trip ended with us, at least the adults, most of the adults, getting to go on the gorilla trek, which was unbelievable. Can't even describe it to you. And after the gorilla trek, we went up to the house of this American that we were kind of connected with there. And I want to show you where he lived. If you look at this picture, he lives in this house at the top of this mountain, and you drive up this dirt road, and he lives in this amazing house, and it overlooks Lake Kivu. And on the other side of the lake is the Congo. And I just stood there for the longest, just looking out at how amazing God's creation was, how beautiful it was, how breathtaking this spot was. And it's hard for me to even describe it to you. And so when you see something like that, what is stirred in you is a sense of awe or a sense of wonder, right? And amazement at what God has done and what he's created. And that sense of wonder is what opens the door for us to an opportunity to worship. And so while these facts are hard for us to take in and understand about God, why it's hard for us to comprehend his fullness, this feeling of wonder when we begin to ponder his characteristics and who he is, they stir us to worship. And that's really the goal. So when you're overwhelmed by these attributes and trying to understand them and things aren't making sense and you feel like I'm saying one thing and then I'm saying something else, and how can they both be true at once? I just want you to remember that you weren't made to fully understand. You weren't made to fully understand. You were made to be in awe and ultimately to worship. So as we study these attributes, another thing that I want you to remember is that as we talk about these things, God is always all of these things simultaneously. He doesn't jump around. Today I'm going to be omniscient. Tomorrow I'm going to be omnipresent. Next week I'll be omnibeneficent. He doesn't turn something off in order to turn another one on. And that's hard for us to understand. It's hard for us to reconcile. That he doesn't turn off his kindness in order to be just. He doesn't turn off his love in order to be righteous. He is all of these things all the time. And so that's why it's important that we understand his goodness. Because as we go, we have to remember that he is always good. Even as he's also limitlessly powerful, always present, knowing everything all at the same time. And even as we can't understand that. So today we're going to be talking about God's omnipotence. And the definition that I want to give you for omnipotence is just that means that God is in total control of himself and his creation. I'm going to give you a minute to write that down, that God is in total control of himself and his creation. Because this attribute is often misinterpreted or misstated as God can do anything. When people think of God's omnipotence, they mistakenly will say God can do anything. And that's not what omnipotence means, because there are things that God cannot do. And I hope that catches your attention a little bit, but to explain that, we need to kind of pause for a minute and sort of have Logic 101, okay? We're not going to go too deep in this, but God cannot do anything that violates his nature. If he did, then he would no longer be God, right? Because he would have invalidated his nature as God. So since he is holy and just, he cannot be unholy or unjust. Like we learned last week, he is always limitlessly good. So he cannot be bad or evil. He cannot have bad intentions towards you. He cannot have a motivation that is evil towards you in your life. There are things that God cannot do. But when it comes to his power over the universe, over all that he has created, it is limitless. It knows no end. He has complete and total control over all he has created, which, guess what? That's everything. That's everything. And no thing is able to limit God's power, but God's power is restricted. It's restricted by himself, by his own nature, by his own character, and nothing else. Psalm 115:3 tells us our God is in the heavens and he does all that he pleases. Jeremiah 32:17 says, Lord God, it is you who have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and by your outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. And this means that God is never worn out or overwhelmed by his responsibility of being God. He didn't rest on the seventh day because he was tired. He didn't come to the end of creating everything and be like, whew, man, that was a lot of work. I'm worn out. We need to take a break for a day. No, he knew that we needed that model. He knew that he needed to, it wasn't so much as resting for him as ceasing activity. And so he knew that we need that. So he modeled that for us, but it wasn't about him being tired. He never runs out of energy or needs to replenish it. Now, another attribute of God that is tied tightly to omnipotence is sovereignty. And so God is omnipotent, meaning he's limitlessly powerful, and he's sovereign, meaning that he not only has the power, he has the authority to use that power. And so God has all the power, and he has the right to use it. And so you'll see on the slide up there, omnipotence is about God's ability, but sovereignty is about his authority. Because sometimes we have power, but we don't have the authority to use it. And sometimes maybe we have authority, but we don't have the power. God has both. He has the authority and the power because of his omnipotence and because of his sovereignty. Now, when we think about power in our human understanding, we tend to think of power as either a good thing to have or a bad thing that maybe others have, depending on how we've seen that power used. But what I want you to recognize is power is a neutral thing. Power is a neutral thing. It's just dependent on how it's being used. When you have power in your house and you can come in and flip a light switch or turn your air conditioner on, Lord willing, maybe soon you can turn that thing off, turn the heat on. Power is a good thing, right? But if we have a storm come through and a power line has fallen into your pool, that's life-threateningly dangerous. It's not that that power is bad, it's just how it's being used. And so we can see power as a bad thing, as a scary thing, because we have seen flawed humans yield power in a negative way. But in the hands of a God who is omnibeneficent, a God who is limitlessly good, power is a great thing. So what does it look like when we try to mimic this? When we try to be this in our own power and be like God? I mean, the obvious answer is that this looks like us wanting to have power and control, right? And I mean, I don't know if I don't struggle with that. You might. Power, control, like wanting to just tell your kids to do it and do it now because I said so and because I'm bigger than you and I'm the boss. Like, I mean, I've never said that, but you may have. But as moms, this is a huge struggle for us because like we talked about last week, 2 weeks ago, if we could have the power and be in control, then we feel like we can guarantee the outcome that we want. And so we seek to use our power in order to control. But just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should, right? Another way that this shows up is in a tendency to overfunction, to have a hard time saying no, to wanting to be all things to all people because we think that we have the power to continue to function at that pace, that we have the energy and the ability to do all of those things, and so we can overfunction as moms. Another thing that I tend to at least think, if I don't say, is I can fix this. Problem comes up, hey, I got this. It's going to be fine. We're going to fix this, and everything's going to be great. Anybody else? Anybody a fixer or a I got this under control kind of person? That is us assuming power and taking on that responsibility and depending upon ourselves instead of depending on God. Our quest for power can sometimes be to make ourselves feel like we're above or better than people around us. We use power to make us feel superior so that we feel better about ourselves. Power shows up, this quest for power shows up in so many ways in our lives. But the bottom line is that we have a desire to do whatever we want to do. We have a desire to do whatever we want to do, to be ruled by no one else but ourselves. We want to do things our way. We want to do things that we want to do when we want to do them. We think we know best many times, and if we could just be in control, if we could just do things the way that they play out in our mind, that everything is going to work out. But the problem is we were not created to be capable of handling that kind of power, because we don't have the other attributes that God has. I am not omnibeneficent as much as I would love to be always good. I'm not. I'm not omnipresent. I don't have the ability to be anywhere all the time, to be everywhere all the time. I'm not omniscient, even though I think I know what's best. I don't have the perfect knowledge that God has in order to know what is actually good. And so we were not created to have this kind of power. So how do we live within our limits and allow God to be the one who's omnipotent? How do we let go of our struggle for power and depend on him? Well, I want to go back to a statement that I made a few minutes ago, and I want you to just stop if you're writing or you're distracted somehow. I want you to just stop for a minute, maybe even close your eyes and really listen to this statement. Because God is omnipotent, he has all the power. And because he is also sovereign, he has the authority. And here's what I want you to listen to. God has complete and total control over everything. God has complete and total control over everything. I want you to take a minute and just think about, how does that make you feel? The fact that God has complete and total control over everything, how does that make you feel? Be honest. Because for some of us, we feel scared. Maybe because we don't really know, we don't really trust that God is good. Maybe the way our life has played out doesn't feel like God is good. Or maybe we're scared because we're not really sure that God is omniscient and that he really knows what he's doing. Maybe even for some of us, we know and we trust that God's good. We trust that he knows what he's doing, but we're scared of what that might be. We're scared of what he might ask us to do, what he might have in store for our lives. That his plan for us might be hard and it might not be what we would choose. I want you to listen to this quote from Adam Ramsey, who wrote the book Truth on Fire. He said, "I will only be unsettled by God's sovereignty if deep down I don't believe he can be trusted with that kind of authority. I'll only be unsettled by God's sovereignty if I don't believe that he can be trusted with that kind of authority. Thinking that I could do a better job or that he isn't trustworthy with that level of power." Now, for some of you, as you think about that statement, that God has complete and total control over everything, for some of you, that feels like a weight off. To know that at least somebody out there who knows what they're doing and has the power to be in control is in control. At least we're not just at the, asleep with nobody at the wheel. And so for some of you, that is reassuring. And I want us to recognize that this attribute of God and his omnipotence is meant to stir rest in us as we trust in God. So the fact that God is all powerful is meant to stir rest in you. And we can rest knowing that there is nothing that can withstand the power of God. Because remember, go back to our statement, God has complete and total control over everything. No one has the power to thwart God's plans. Not even you. Now, there are days that I sit and I think, man, I am screwing everything up. I'm messing up my kids. I'm messing up my other relationships. I am really screwing things up. And maybe I've messed up God's plan for me. Maybe you even sit here and feel like, you know what? I think I ran ahead of God and I think I married the wrong person. And I want you to hear me say, you cannot mess up God's plans. You can't do it. You're not that strong. His power is greater than you, than your mistakes. It's greater than your decisions. He's greater than your actions. And so I want you to rest knowing that he is in control. And the beauty is that lets us know that we can stop trying so hard. And we can rest in our weaknesses and in our mistakes and in our struggles. Because the Bible tells us that when we're weak, God is what? Strong. He's strong. So part of our sanctification, that process of becoming more like God, is coming to the terms that we are not God. Nor do we have any capability to be God. But we can be at peace with God being God. And we can rest. And when we come to this place of recognizing who God is and who we are, we can't just stop there with just that knowledge. Because like I said earlier, all of these attributes are meant to lead us to a place of worship. That's the whole reason that we're doing this study. The two things that I wanted out of this study is I wanted this study to spur you on, to then spur your family on, to know God more and to love him more. J.I. Packer says it this way. He says the purpose of theology is doxology. We study in order to praise. And we do that by trusting God and resting in his power. That is worship, because when we trust in him, when we rest in him, we're acknowledging that he's God and we're not. And that's worship. And I don't know what's going on in your life, but maybe you're still sitting there thinking to yourself, Carrie, I'm with you, but you don't know what's going on in my life. And it just feels big. It just feels too big. Too big to trust God with. Too big to know that he has the power over it. Too big to know that he is good and will do good in my life. But I just want you to remember the verse that we said earlier. Jeremiah 32:17 says, Lord God, it is you who have made the heavens and the earth, and by your great power and by your outstretched arm, nothing is too hard for you. And so I want you to remember, nothing is too big for God, because nothing can exceed his power. And I think the other thing that we can sometimes think when we talk about God's power and how big he is we can begin to think, well, that's great for the bigger things in my life, but the things that I'm dealing with right now are just like the day-to-day struggles. And they're not huge things, but they are weighing on me. They're stressing me and they're keeping me awake at night. But I don't think that they're big enough for God to be concerned about. But here's the thing, nothing is too small for God either. Because he isn't too busy somewhere else with other things. Because he has all the power. He's not tied up over here working on the big things like, what's going on in our world and people who are dying of illnesses, that he can't care about your worries today. He's not uncaring or unknowing. He has the power, and we're going to see in the next couple weeks, he has the knowledge and he has the presence to care about your every moment, to be present in your every moment, to have the power over your every moment. And that's hard for us to understand, that he could even do this for all of us in this room at the same time, much less everyone on the planet. But God has that power. And so whatever you're facing today, whether it's big or whether it's small, I want you to look at Luke 12:7. That says, why even the hairs of your head are all numbered. I mean, my count's going down. I don't know about you. The count's getting grayer. Hopefully you're not there yet. And God knows each one of them. The hairs on your head are all numbered. Fear not, for you are more value than many sparrows. And so I just want to close with this question today. How do you need to rest in God's omnipotence this week? His power in your life. How do you need to rest in that so that you can love and worship him in a deeper way? How do you need to rest in God's omnipotence this week so that you can love and worship him in a deeper way? If you're scared of his omnipotence, just tell him. Tell him, God, I want to trust your power. I believe in your power, but I'm scared of it. Help me to know that you are good. He can handle that. If you're doubting his power, tell him that too. God, this is really big, and I'm not sure if you can handle this or not. Help me to believe. But my prayer is that you will understand his power in a way that causes your love for him, your awe for him, your wonder and your worship to increase this week. God, we just thank you for who you are. God, we thank you that you are not bound by anyone or anything except your own nature, your own character and your own self. God, I thank you that you have the power to be present in our small moments when we're worried about things that won't matter tomorrow, but they matter now. Or when we're facing the big things that maybe are life-altering. God, would you remind us in those moments where we're depending on our power, maybe out of a feeling of, well, I can take care of this one. I'll save the bigger things for God to deal with. God, help us know that you care about them all, that we need to depend on your power in all situations, and that your power is worthy of our dependence, that you are capable of us leaning completely on you. God, would you just continue to teach our hearts what this means about who you are? And would you use that knowledge to spur us on to worship you and to love you more? God, help us as we teach our kids, no matter what age, more about you, more about your limitlessness, more about your power, more about who you are. Would you just give us wisdom as we do that this week and help us look to you? In Jesus' name, amen.